Welcome in, Minnesota sports fans, to another edition of Vikings on SI. Jonathan Harrison here, joined once again by Tony Liebert and Will Ragatz. Guys, it was another exciting weekend for Minnesota football. The Vikings remain undefeated after a trip over to London, but it wasn't without some concern once again in the second half. The Vikings take a big double-digit lead in the first half, but then struggle in the second half as they really just struggled with a number of different things, most notably Aaron Jones leaving due to an injury. That certainly hampered the offense. Will, I want to get the conversation here on this Monday started off with, should we be concerned about this Vikings offense's struggles, specifically as they have the leads, because they've had a lead pretty much all this season, and it seems like when they get up, they really struggle to just keep teams down?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this, and my answer is yes, there's some concern, but it's not anywhere near some sort of full-on panic or anything yet. The Vikings we've seen the stat, they've only trailed for 3 minutes and 26 seconds this year, and sometimes it's hard to maintain leads in the NFL, especially against good teams like the Vikings have played just about every week this season. The Packers, their Vikings got a little comfortable or whatever, and Jordan Love led Green Bay back into that game. And then it happened again in this game in London against the Jets, where they kind of let them back in the game. And the defense was unbelievable and was the reason why the Vikings were able to win. But there has to be a little bit of concern after an offensive performance that was that poor. And we can dive more into it, but it was almost the first signs we've seen of some cracks in the armor, with Sam Darnold looking like maybe a young Jets version of Sam Darnold, coincidentally, against the team that drafted him. And how much of that is, Aaron Jones leaving was a really huge deal for the offense. How much is the Jets just have a really good defense, one of the best pass defenses in the league? How much is maybe it was just a weird day where Darnold and Jefferson and Addison couldn't really seem to connect all that often in what was an aggressive, deep downfield passing game plan. So I have a little concern going into the bye week, which is a good time to fix things ahead of what's going to be a huge, highly anticipated game against the Lions in Week 7. But I'm managing the concern right now and trying to put this all in context, because the Vikings are 5-0, and it's you can't ask for anything better than that.
Yeah, absolutely. Tony, are you concerned about what you've seen over the past specifically 2 weeks, especially as the Vikings have had the lead and they've struggled offensively just to keep hold of the ball and kind of put teams away?
Yeah, I think this week specifically was kind of a regression to the mean type of game. I think it was just more evidence that this team will lean on its defense throughout the year. It'll be a defensive first team. And it was a weird game, and it was a prime look-ahead spot with the bye week, with the Lions the week after, and in London, Sam Darnold against his former team. There are a lot of outside circumstances coming into the game, and as much as the Vikings have proven that they will be, I guess, a contender to win the division, and if not the conference, I think it just showed that they're far from a perfect team. And when you can still win those games, that's what good teams do. So, everything Will said, there's if you dive deeper, there's clearly some things that need to be improved. But when you're able to win games like this, that's how you're able to put together an 11-12 win season. Which is still very much on the table.
One of those things that clearly needs to be improved still, despite some early successes by Aaron Jones, is the running game. We saw its struggles late in the game after he went out with an injury. Ty Chandler just not having a great day, had the ball bounce off him on a pitch attempt that led to a turnover, and then he ended up rushing 14 carries, 30 yards, a 2.1 average, and that is horrendous in the NFL. You need to be better than what Ty Chandler showed. Do the Vikings over the bye week and leading up until the trade deadline, do they need to go out and find a new running back too? Is it time to start focusing on that? Because obviously Aaron Jones has had his issues with injury in the past. If he's going to be out, the offense cannot stutter and struggle like it did yesterday. Do they need to go find a new backup running back behind Aaron Jones, Will?
I'm not there yet. I think we should give Ty Chandler a little more opportunity here, and maybe if he continues to struggle, let's say if Jones has to miss a game or two after the bye, which the early reports are that fairly optimistic ahead of his MRI, that it doesn't seem like a very significant hip thing. But if he has to miss the Lions game and Ty Chandler gets to start and doesn't play well, I think maybe those conversations would happen a little bit. The issue is, like, who are you gonna necessarily get unless you want to trade a pick, which the Vikings already have traded a bunch of their picks. There aren't a bunch of obvious upgrades just sitting out there in free agency. I think Ty Chandler deserves the benefit of the doubt for what he did in the final stretch last year as the RB1. He had a good game earlier this year. Maybe it was week 2 or week 3, something like that, where he was pretty efficient. I don't know. I haven't watched all of the film yet, so I don't know if Ty Chandler's missing open running lanes, or if the blocking just wasn't there and the Jets were playing great run defense, or what exactly that was. But you're right in the general point that the Vikings have to be able to find a way to keep their offense afloat if Aaron Jones misses time. Because even if he plays against the Lions, there's no guarantee that he's not going to get banged up again. I mean, he's almost 30. He has a history of some hip and hamstring and knee issues over the years. So, yeah, I was thinking about it yesterday when the Vikings were just doing nothing on offense for most of the second half. Like, this can't all be because you lost your running back.
Right.
Like, Aaron Jones is a great player, but this is about the offensive line and the receivers and the play calling, and above all else, it's about Sam Darnold, who I just didn't think looked very good at all yesterday for much of that game. So they got a lot of things to look at over the bye week and to fix to make sure that just being without Jones doesn't totally derail their offense.
I think a part of it for me was after Jones went out, they not only did they move away from the running game, which clearly wasn't working with Ty Chandler, they didn't do screens that much. There was a lot of these plays where you would expect, oh, let's do that because it's an easy way to pick up some small yardage just to keep the offense going, just keep the offense and the clock moving. And they didn't do that. They tried to take shot after shot after shot. I don't know how much that is down to Sam Darnold or play calling, as you said, Will, but this has been an ongoing issue for Kevin O'Connell's offense is these screen games. And it looked like through the first couple weeks, it seemed like it had fixed, but yesterday it seemed like we all reverted back a little bit and the screen game just went out the window when you could have used it the most, Tony.
Yeah, back to the running back thing. I think it's an interesting discussion for as good of an offseason that the front office had on the defensive side of the ball with all their free agent additions. I think it's worth some sort of criticism that they really only have 2 running backs on this roster with a guy like Aaron Jones, who is fairly injury prone the last couple of years. Like Will, I'm not ready to give up on Ty Chandler, but I find it a little odd they didn't take like a 7th round flyer on a guy in the draft or sign someone to like a 1-year deal, a veteran type guy, because they are simply, I think, just shallow at that position. And if Jones does miss extended period of time, leaning on Ty Chandler is going to be an interesting decision if that's what they decide to do. They clearly like what they've seen out of him from camp and stuff if they're willing to do that. But that's certainly something that's interesting to follow because especially in the NFL, running backs often are a part of their system and they're a product of their environment, and they lean on everything around them, and that has kind of been what has helped Aaron Jones so far this year. And you can't put it all on a running back, especially at this level of football, but I think this game showed that they just need better performance out of the position because they just didn't get it in this game. The offense as a whole just didn't seem to have that much rhythm. But I think it's something they can improve, but it's definitely something worth following. Will mentioned people in free agency that you could look at, and at this point of the year, it's obviously very slim. But when you look at teams like the Chiefs, I feel like always have like an emergency running back they pick up, like Jerick McKinnon, Kareem Hunt. Jerick McKinnon, I think he's still only like 32. Maybe that's a guy they could go after. But I don't think they're going to do that. But the running back situation is definitely something worth following.
Yeah, man, I think maybe they should go after Gophers legend Mo Ibrahim, huh? Who they had for like a week in the preseason. No, I mean, yeah, they've got Myles Gaskin. there who can do some things if necessary. They took a flyer. It was last year or 2 years ago on Dwayne McBride in the 7th round. Didn't really work out. But yeah, I want to transition away from the running back thing and just generally one thing I thought was interesting about the offensive performance yesterday, or the offensive plan and effectiveness, was they really were aggressive, like Jonathan mentioned earlier. Like I at one point was like, oh, the offensive line isn't playing super well, and Ed Ingram had a pretty rough day in the PFF grades, and pressures and pass blocking and all of that. But a lot of it was Sam Darnold taking a lot of time to throw, and I don't know to what extent that was Darnold not seeing things great or the coverage being good, or also just Kevin O'Connell seemed to be dialing up a lot of kind of long developing routes and slower pass plays. Sam Darnold's average intended air yards, or his average depth of target, was 13.5 yards, which was the highest in the NFL yesterday. I believe the highest of his season. Like there weren't a lot of easy answers to the test, so to speak, for Darnold, which we've seen a lot this season. Is one of the great things about O'Connell as a play caller, is that he simplifies a complex offense for Darnold. But they were taking shot after shot to Jefferson and Addison, and they completed a handful of them. They got a couple, what I thought honestly were pretty soft defensive penalties on the Jets to keep some drives alive. But I'd like to see more of a balance of whether it's screen games or whether it's just underneath routes or things like that, giving Darnold some easier opportunities to get into a rhythm instead of having him throw so many balls aggressively down the field, which I generally like. Don't get me wrong. I like throwing the ball down the field and giving Jefferson and Addison chances. But I think there has to be a balance to it when, Darnold was 14 of 31 in that game. At one point, he had 7 straight incompletions, including an interception. Like, the rhythm just wasn't there. And O'Connell, to his credit, as he always does, after a loss or even after a win where they don't play particularly well, he took the blame and said, I got to be better as a play caller. I got to review and do some things differently. So my belief in O'Connell as an offensive mind and play caller is so high that I'm not particularly worried about this game. But Week 7 will be big for the Vikings offense and for Darnold specifically to bounce back and get that confidence and that rhythm back that we saw in the first month of the season.
Yeah, for sure. We've seen Darnold sling it quite a bit this season. We've seen, as you said, Kevin O'Connell has or provides his quarterbacks with these answers that the wide receivers just tends to be at least 1 or 2 open on every play, it feels like. And it just seemed like with how aggressive they were launching the ball downfield against a Jets team that does have a very, very good cornerback duo, it seemed like there was some questions there as to why.
I think Gardner and Reed are the best cornerback duo in the league. So that has to be part of this general discussion as well. The Lions don't have guys like that.
Right. Yeah, and you knew that going in. It's not like that was something that just sprung up on you. Those two have been very good, if not the best, as you said, over the past 3 years since Gardner entered the league. Another question I have for you guys. Have we seen enough of Ed Ingram? Will, you mentioned it a little bit. His PFF grade was awful yesterday, a 19.8 pass blocking grade, allowed 5 pressures and a sack. They were just running over him time and time again. As we said, Sam Darnold had to sit in the pocket and wait for these long developing routes, and Ed Ingram was just bowled over. Have we seen enough of Ed Ingram, guys? Is it time to move on?
We've had this discussion. It's kind of up and down. He had a decent game in Week 4. This one wasn't very good. I don't know. I still think they're going to stick with him for a bit longer just because Dalton Risner isn't healthy yet. And again, the discussion is always, that they like what Ed Ingram does in the run blocking game. I think Quinnen Williams is a tough matchup that he got some of in Week 5. But yeah, the stakes, I think this is a general topic of discussion that we can get into more over the bye week. Like, the stakes get higher when you're a 5-0 team that looks like it has a chance to do something special this year. You can't afford to keep trotting Ed Ingram out there. And I guess you have a bigger cushion in the standings. But, if they're playing for a championship, we're going to start talking about any little weakness on this team, and Ed Ingram's part of that, as something they should really consider addressing. And I don't know to what extent we think that they should go all in on this season to some degree, and consider, trading a pick or two and adding somebody at the deadline. But if there's a proven guard out there who is better than Eddie Ingram and healthier than Dalton Reisner, I would be curious to see what kind of pick it would take to get that guy on the team, because the offensive line, as we talk about, is kind of a weak link unit.
Yeah, I think we're gonna, I guess, learn how important interior offensive lineman is, like Ingram, because it's obviously an interesting discussion because it's probably one of the least valuable positions on a football field. But when it is that poor of a performance, and it impacts everything, it impacts the rhythm, like we saw in this game. And I don't know how often right guards hit the trade market in the NFL. I guess the Vikings traded Ezra Cleveland a couple of years ago, so
Yeah.
maybe a situation like that where you just get another body in there. And Will brought up an interesting point, because maybe heading into the year they were like, oh, maybe we'll be around a 500 ball club, and we can just kind of figure out what we have with Ed Ingram and maybe address that position next year. But now your margins are pretty slim when you're playing in these high stakes games, and we're going to figure out how important that position is for him going forward.
Let me ask you guys this. As we go throughout this season, the Vikings are now 5-0 on the season. They're clearly considered a Super Bowl contender at this point. I mean, if you're 5-0, you reach 5-0, you have to be thinking along those lines. And we know the stat that we wrote about this morning on Vikings on SI about the time in the lead at this point in the season, that the previous 4 or 3 teams that have had a similar or even lower time trailing so far this season have all reached the Super Bowl. So clearly there are signs there that many, maybe even Joe included, are willing to think that the Vikings are going to the Super Bowl. So with the trade deadline coming up here in a couple weeks' time, should the Vikings, with how well they're playing and how well it seems like they're going to play with conceivably the easier part of their schedule coming up, so they should be able to rack up some even more wins, should they think about a big swing at the trade deadline with that first round pick? I know they don't have a whole lot of or draft capital going into next season, but if you're going to be good, your first round pick's going to be later in the first round, and from everything we've heard, this isn't going to be that deep of a draft. Should you just consider maybe dealing that first round pick for a big swing to help you out and just put all your chips in the table?
It's a good question. It's something that I think we have to talk about when we're covering a 5-0 team. Is where are the potential avenues for improvement, and could they, like you said, make a big swing and try to go after this thing? I think there's a couple factors, a couple questions that come to my mind. The first one is, like, who would that be? What position would they look to add at? They're pretty complete on defense, with the exception of maybe the defensive tackle spot. And I think a name that you'll see floated, or I've seen floated, that Vikings fans would love to have, and everybody would love to have, is Dexter Lawrence from the Giants, who had another monster game against the Seahawks.
I'll be honest, that was the name I was thinking as I was asking this question, because I've seen it just thrown out there a couple times.
I thought that might have been the case. I just don't see it happening from the Giants' end, because he's such a good player, and because, well, I guess I was thinking the Giants were 3-2. No, they're 2-3 after beating the Seahawks. So they're sort of still they can talk themselves to being more in the mix than if they had lost that game to be 1-4. Lawrence is such a dominant player in his prime, like a foundational guy. I think they'd ask for a minimum of 2 firsts, probably 2 firsts and then some. And that's just not something I necessarily see Kwesi Adofo-Mensah doing. Offensively, it's like the Vikings don't need another receiver. They don't need they're getting TJ Hockenson back at tight end. Like we talked about the running back, but Aaron Jones doesn't sound like he's going to be out for a long time. You're not like trading for a quarterback midseason. Right. It would maybe be a guard or something, but that wouldn't be a huge swing. So I don't know. The other question that comes to mind is, let's say we're talking about like the Dexter Lawrence thing, and just the general idea is to go full Rams and screw them picks. Like let's go all in on this year. I think the Vikings will want to see a couple more weeks of the offense to decide whether that's worth it, because Right now, they are number one in the league in DVOA, which is a stat that I love to cite. Defense adjusted value over average. They're number one in the league overall, largely because they are number one on defense by a mile. They're 11th in special teams and they're 20th on offense. So they have a below average offense after yesterday by that statistic. I think they'll want to see a few more weeks to make sure that they really believe Sam Darnold has a Super Bowl ceiling in this offense if they're going to go all in. Because if not, if you have some concerns about Darnold, it wouldn't make a ton of sense to go all in on this season and sacrifice pieces that'll help you build around the J.J. McCarthy window, which is what we thought was most important coming into this season when we didn't think that they'd be 5-0.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting, and I think the next few weeks we're going to figure out like how much the Vikings actually believed that Sam Darnold was going to perform at this level. Because like Will mentioned, like you kind of have to go all in or not. Like in the next few weeks, you're going to have to decide if you want to do that. Do you think they would trade for a cornerback, Will? I know Stephon Gilmore and Byron Murphy are playing very well, but that was obviously a position that had a lot of questions in the offseason. Do you think they could do something like that?
Yeah, that's not a bad point that I didn't get to, is that, yeah, that was their other kind of area of weakness on the defense coming into the season. And Gilmore's been awesome. He is 33 or 34. Griffin and Murphy have been more kind of fine than anything else. So, yeah, you could theoretically see them taking a swing there. But, again, it's like who would be available? Would they? Yeah. Do you really feel like you need to do something like that when you've gotten pretty good play out of these three vets so far? Again, I guess they don't have a lot of depth there where Fabian Moreau or Caleb Evans would be next up. But, yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. Corner, D-tackle, guard, something like that. And I will say the trade deadline is on November 5th.
Yep.
So that still gives them – I was thinking maybe they only had 2 more games, but they have 3 more games. The Lions, at the Rams, and home for the Colts before they have to make any decisions there on the deadline.
And they'll have a mini bye after that Rams game because it's a Thursday night game. So you'll have a number of days as well to just add to your thinking on that. So I think those are, if you look at it, those are 3 very good games to kind of figure out, test that hypothesis of whether you think this will be a contender. The Lions, that's going to be a knock 'em out, drag 'em out game between 2 of the top teams in the NFC as we're looking at it right now.
In the league, I'd say.
Yeah, 49ers are struggling this season early on. I mean, if you're looking at it right now, looking at records-wise and how each team has played, those are 2 of the best teams in the NFC, maybe even the league. That's going to be a huge test for Darnold. And then the next 2 games, the Rams are kind of middling. You'd expect to be able to put them away, and then you certainly should be putting away the Colts early and easy in that one. So I think those are 3 very good games that if Darnold performs well, I think you absolutely do push your chips in the middle and see what you can come out with. And it'll certainly be an interesting conversation to keep track of as we go on through this next month or so until that trade deadline on November 5th.
I think, yeah, and I just think that could be making a win now addition before the deadline doesn't have to mean trading for one of the best players in the league like Dexter Lawrence, because that just isn't something that realistically happens very often in any sport, especially in the NFL. That could just mean adding a starter caliber guy at guard or at corner or at defensive tackle or at running back, or just somewhere where you're going to add depth. You're going to raise ideally both your floor and your ceiling. And if they can do that without giving up the future first, that would be great. But obviously, it's the more you pay, the more you theoretically get back. So I'll be fascinated to see how Kwesi Adofo-Mensah treats the deadline, assuming that the Vikings keep winning and are maybe 7-1 or at least 6-2 heading into the deadline. Maybe 8-0, as Joe would probably predict.
That is the one thing we are missing here on this Overreaction Monday is Joe's overwhelming optimism, even after the struggle bus of a second half that was for the Vikings in their win over the Jets. Boys, been fun talking to you. Certainly we'll have more to discuss about the undefeated Vikings and now the Super Bowl contending Vikings, you'd have to say, after a 5-0 start. Looking forward to those conversations right back here on the channel. Do hit subscribe. It does help us get found. Also lets you know when we post a new video here just about every day here on the Bring Me the Sports YouTube channel. We'll talk to you tomorrow with another topic across Minnesota sports to talk about. We'll talk to you then.